Welcome to this third webinar in the Silicon Web Customers Guild Presents 24-25 season, Cosplay Central Crown Championships with Maral Agnerian. The Silicon Web Customers Guild Presents webinar series offers talks by speakers on a variety of topics about costumes and costuming. The webinars are free to Silicon Web members, and they may also be available to the greater costuming community on a space available basis. Send feedback or suggestions for future speakers or topics to webinars@siwcustomers.org. The chapter acknowledges the International Costumers Guild Marty Gear Costuming Arts and Sciences Fund for a grant award in support of developing this webinar series, and the International Costumers Guild for making its Zoom platform available to chapters and special interest groups. A few notes on Zoom. Please set or leave your video and audio recording controls on mute. Feel free to chat or react during the presentation. There'll be a Q&A period after the presentation. To ask a question, type it into the chat window. When the webinar is over, please complete a brief survey on your experience. The Cosplay Central Crown Championships of Cosplay is a major costuming competition with regional, national, and international rounds. Maral Agnerian, the 2024 U.S. national title winner, will talk about the competition, her experience participating through multiple stages, and the costumes that she created. She will also discuss what meeting and talking with other cosplayers from around the world has meant to her. Addicted to anything shiny, Maral Agnerian has a love for beading, embroidery, and gold work. She also loves the challenge of bringing something 2D to life, as well as flexing her creative muscle by interpreting fandom characters through the lens of historical fashion. Maral competes in runs and serves as a judge for masquerades at the local, regional, and international levels. Most recently, she was the Sci-Fi, Fantasy, and Fandom Masquerade Director at CustomCon 42. She also teaches classes on basic and advanced costuming techniques. Maral has also written articles for Silicon Web's Virtual Costumer magazine, including the cover feature, Becoming Sid Charisse, for the May 2012 issue. This is one of my favorite covers. It shows Maral in her costume in the scene where she's actually wearing it in Singing in the Rain. So with that, welcome, Maral, and please take it away.
I make a costume that I want to make, and then I try to figure out what I'm going to do with it on stage or where. And because I operate that way, I had never really considered entering one of these really big championships. Because from what I had seen, it seemed like those championships, you need to sort of engineer the entire build from the ground up, with competitiveness in mind. And I do still think that is like a very valid way to approach those championships. It gives you a very good chance. But that's not really how I do things. So I basically, I started making this costume because it was a dream costume. I won't go to the next slide. Yeah, so this was a dream project. And once I started working on it and realized the scope of the project, I started to think about maybe I should try and compete this somewhere big because I might have a chance. I especially started thinking that when I think it was 2022, the winner of the Crown Championship Global was Beth from the UK, and she won with a Game of Thrones costume that had a lot of needlework and embroidery on it. And after seeing her win, I thought, okay, so maybe a primarily needlework costume might have a chance. So then I started thinking about like what competitions could I take this to. So here is the original artwork. As you can see, it's very graphic in terms of like stark black and white, or black and light blue in this case. And I had to, because I only have this one image that I was working from, it's the cover image of a book. There was a lot of decision making that I had to do to interpret it into something that I could actually wear. For example, you may notice that the lady in the artwork is way taller than I am. I'm like 5'1". So there was no way I was going to be able to replicate that one-to-one on me and make it not look stupid, especially with that, look how long her skirt is. I would have to be standing on a box. So I interpreted the red swirl in the front of her skirt into the inlining of my cape instead, because I figured it would still give me that pop of color that I loved, but make it a little bit more practical. And I also interpreted the black lines of the artwork by doing blackout lines for all of my embroidery. So basically how I tackled the embroidery was to, hold on, am I able to see the chat? I don't think I can see the chat. I don't know where the thing is. So we'll deal with it later. Okay. Kathy can tell me if there's anything important in the chat. So I did all of the blackout lines first, and then I would fill in the embellishments and embroidery, sort of just making it up as I went. And again, because I was working just from some line art, a lot of it was just going on vibes. I would, start in one spot and then basically just try to vary the techniques that I was using so that I didn't have the same technique right next to it itself. So I'd have some like visual variety, so it wouldn't just be like one big blob. One of the things that I did have to keep in mind, one of the decisions that I made specifically was, say, if you look at the front of the bodice there, on the sides, there's those feather motifs. Those were done in tambour embroidery on organzas. And I did that specifically so that they were very flat, because I didn't want a lot of bulk around the waistline. Similarly, on this sleeve embroidery, I specifically used a more smooth techniques on the inside of the sleeve. So the underarm, like the underside of my wrist, so that if I were to brush my arm against my skirt, it wouldn't snag. So anything that might be snaggy, I put on the top of the wrist and not on the underside of the wrist. So those were some of the things that I had to sort of keep in mind in the planning stages when deciding what techniques I wanted to use. So like, for example, there aren't any big rhinestones with the metal settings on the underside of the arm, because that would be very snaggy. Now, is this going to play?
Okay, continuing with my Snow Glass Apples Queen costume deep dive, here's the bodice. So starting out on the front, these are all sew-on rhinestones. This thick black trim is this, it's a vintage trim I found called beadette. It's a cord that is sparkly like beads. And it's very cool, although I find that you can pull it out of shape, so I found it easier to glue down first and then stitch down. So I've got, at the hem, I've got a couple rows. I've got a piping and then some beading and some cording for like a layered effect. Here I have the same iridescent narrow trim that I used earlier on the collar, if you saw the previous video, but here it's just laid down flat instead of zigzagged over padding. Here we've got the bullion, so the gold work materials laid flat without padding in alternating lines. Here we've got the same chip work that we saw in the collar. This is actually, I did it first here and I loved it so much I wanted to use it elsewhere. And a lot of this costume was extrapolating from the original artwork and then sort of making it up as I went along, of which materials I was going to use, which techniques I was going to use, and experimenting. And a lot of it, like the fun of the costume was doing that, because I had a lot of creative freedom. So here on the sides of the bodice, This is the waist area, and so I knew I wanted to keep it fairly like flat to the fabric to not bulk up the waist. So these feathers are actually tambour embroidered onto organza, and then applique down onto the bodice. So this here is gold work, but the rest of it is very flat tambour embroidery. And the outlines are done with a narrow black cord that I couched down. And these ones were done separately, just to have a little bit of dimension. And the decoration here is a combination of embroidery, and then I added some sparkly threads and a little bit of the metallic chips for sparkle. And similarly here, these scales, I wanted a little bit different texture. So these are mostly embroidery so I added some sparkly threads in and the chips of bullion. So moving on to the side, you can see here we have, again, a whole just varying versions of the same materials used in different ways. So we've got the gold work bullion twisted into a rope effect here with my favorite craft cord, and then the iridescent trim here and beads. And again, on the back, just like with the back of the collar, I wanted to use a more smooth texture in case the cape was going to catch on it. So I did these in beads instead of in the chip work. And here, these are all beads. Just all sorts of different textures and sizes. So I would basically just do one side, however felt right, and trying different things out. And then if I liked it, I just replicate on the other side. And here, again, on these swirlies, we've got a row of craft cord, a row of beads, a row of gold work, a row of giant rhinestones and pearls, and then some more beads. And then moving on to the sleeve, one of my favorite parts of the entire costume is this rose right here. I use this as an excuse to try this technique. I'd never done it before. I learned it by watching the videos of an Instagram account called, I think it's Submarina407. I'll put it in the description. She does this amazing dimensional embroideries. It's fantastic. So I was trying to replicate that technique. It's basically building up a lot of padding. You use some batting and then fabric over top of that, and then more cord padding on top of that until you get a really three-dimensional effect. And then I couched rayon embroidery threads over top of all the padding in a gradient of colors. Then did the pearl metalwork on the outside edge and beads on the inside for a bit of dimension. And I love how these turned out. I did them separately and then appliqued them onto the sleeve. So for the rest of the sleeve, again, as with the collar, I did all the black outlines first and then filled in everything. And another of my favorite effects is something I discovered doing here, which was laying down the little chips, but instead of in a random direction, making them sort of all one direction, so it gets a kind of like brick effect. I really liked how that turned out for these ones here. And I did that again, like here and here. As opposed to like here, you can see it's more random, and that's done on top of padding. Here on these, this is a metallic thread couch, and it like back and forth zigzag over top of padding. And it takes a really long time, but I do like how it looks. moving down to the bottom part of the sleeve. So this is the inside of the wrist, and as mentioned before, in this area I wanted it to be mostly smooth because I didn't want, like when I brushed my arm against the dress, I didn't want it to snag in anything. So that's why I put these beads here instead of any metal work. And this is all embroidery, so it's pretty smooth. It's like embroidery in sequins. Conversely, on the outside of the sleeve, there's a lot more dense textural stuff going on. So we've got the chip work again, we've got rhinestones, we've got a lot of different trims. This here is a different gold work technique. This is metallic thread that's couched down sort of in concentric circles, like working inwards. So I started out by just outlining and then moving inwards and moving inwards and moving inwards, and then added sequins on top of that. And then this is a chain stitch in a metallic thread. So you can see that they look kind of similar, but there's a textural difference. And again, here I've just got rows of different materials for texture. So there's a silver cord, there's beads, there's a blue craft cord, there's more beads, and then there's rhinestones. Whoops. And here we've got the alternating pearls of cut work for the gold work. Here we've got more of the metallic thread that zigzag back and forth with a line of rhinestones. And then here we have a bezel that I did onto a piece of labradorite, and that goes onto the middle finger. And the sleeve does up with a zipper. And because the cape is so heavy, so this here is where the neck piece attaches. And then here, these clips are for the cape because the cape is incredibly heavy. So I put some slits into the top of the bodice, and this is basically a harness that I wear underneath the bodice on top of my corset to support the weight of the cape, so the cape isn't dragging on the bodice because it would cause problems. Here are some of the other elements of the costume. This is the cape. So the outside and the inside of the cape, for constructing that, I basically planned out all of the it's a satin applique, like a Duchesse satin on velvet. So I planned out all the appliques on my computer, printed them out, taped it all together, cut out the appliques, and then basically basted them down onto the velvet and then embroidered on top of them to secure them. So it was a lot of work. And then I thought it would be reasonable to embroider the inside of the cape as well, because why not? Nobody will really see it, but I'll know it's there. This is the headdress. The base is false shape, and then because false shape is like a fabric, I could embroider straight through it, which is what I did. The spikes are just like kebab skewers. And they actually, well, I'll talk about it in a second, this next video, if this will play. Here we go. So the whole thing is embroidered and beaded. I painted the false shape, the surface of it first to get a base color. And then I sort of drew on the pattern based on what I had drawn out from the art and extrapolated and made up a lot of it as with the rest of the costume. So I had some sort of base areas that I wanted to do, like, this sort of base pattern here, and then just made up and filled in with all sorts of trims and things as I went along. And like with the rest of the costume, I had a lot of fun with just experimenting and trying different textures. And so like, here you can see some of the cut work. We've got my favorite layered stacked trims. So we've got like a soutache and then rhinestone trim, and then that black beadette stuff, which looks kind of like beads, but is actually a trim. My favorite black cords to outline everything. There's padding with iridescent trims. This is basically just little beads that are, I laid down gem tack and then just stacked, dumped a bunch of beads in. So
Whoops. I hit that by accident. So I will skip forward.
This is another technique that I really liked how I sort of figured out as I was making this costume of just, it's a different way of using cut work, kind of like laying it flat again, like a mosaic. So I like the texture and the shine that it gives, because it's like, it's flat, but it has a lot of dimension. I've got this label.
Okay,
so what I did is, you can see I've got this lace on the edge. This base here on the back side is foam, but basically I glued this lace onto the edge, and then the spikies go through holes of the lace to stabilize them, and then they are glued into the actual base down here. So they are being held in place by that lace, and then they are glued onto the fa shape underneath here, and then the foam covers it. So they're really quite stable because they're being held not just at the bottom, but like a little bit of the ways up, and that's how they stay in place.
And just for amusement factor, here's how I travel with this ridiculous thing. I've had to frantically figure out a transport solution at the last minute, because we had originally thought we were going to be driving to New York Comic Con, but at the last minute we ended up having to fly. So I frantically at like 11 p.m. was MacGyvering this thing together, and it worked out quite well.
How do I travel with this? So I made a very MacGyver last minute travel thingy right before New York Comic Con out of cardboard, and it actually worked super well. So I've upgraded it with Velcro instead of just packing tape. So I have these Velcro straps, and then it's like a cardboard and bubble wrap sandwich.
So, and then finally my heart, I wanted glowing heart, so I sculpted it out of monster clay, and I rotocast it in a translucent resin. So basically I made a silicone mold and then rotated the mold while the resin was setting, so it's hollow, and therefore I can put light inside. And it was my first time doing anything similar, so I'm very pleased with how it turned out. It was very nerve-wracking, but learning new skills is important. So that's my costume. Now, moving on to what is the Crown Championships of Cosplay? It is an international competition that is focused on craftsmanship primarily. There are several different sort of circuits of big cosplay championships, worldwide. Some of them are more focused on performance. Some of them are more focused on craftsmanship. Some of them are sort of 50-50, like the World Cosplay Summit is about like 50% performance and 50% craftsmanship. I am not super strong in performance, so I tend to prefer competitions that are more craftsmanship oriented. So this one was mostly perfect for me. At the end, I will discuss a few things that, like, my thoughts about this model of competition and whether it really is for me. But just, as a rough overview, this competition is mostly just craftsmanship. The presentation isn't really important for this one, but it can be expensive to compete in it because you have to be at the big competition where the qualifiers are. In our case, it was New York Comic Con, and so when I won the qualifier at New York Comic Con, the prize money basically just covered our trip to New York. So, it was, I'm glad that it covered our trip to New York, but it was still pretty expensive. So here are the 2023 global winners. The one in the middle is Nerds Gone Mild. She's the one who got first place. And as you can see, like, it's everything. You've got crazy armor, you've got elaborate needlework. Nerds Gone Mild in the middle. If you look her up on Instagram, her work is just astonishing. Like, she did so much unbelievable detail. The close-ups of her costume look exactly the same as the renders from the game. It's really quite amazing. So, how do you enter the competition? There are 4 regional US qualifiers. I did New York Comic Con. The last US qualifier is held at C2E2 in the spring, and the way that they do things at C2E2 is a little bit odd. I'm not sure I love it, but yeah, I don't know how else there might be other ways of doing it. So how they do it is they on the Saturday of C2E2, they will hold the final regional US qualifier to select the 4th person who will be competing on the national level. And then immediately after that person is selected, then they have the national competition. So I was in the green room with all of the people at C2E2. I was in the green room with all the people who were competing nationally and globally, and also the people who were competing regionally. So everybody was in one big green room. So they hold the regional winner, the last regional winner, then that person immediately goes back on stage with the other 3 regional winners. Then they select the North American winner, and then immediately after that, all of the global winners come on stage with the US region, North American national winner, and then they do the global competition. So it was like boom, 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 one after the other. It was it was extremely stressful and slightly frantic, and it was a lot, but it was also wonderful being able to chat with people in the green room and examine everybody's costumes up close. Because as everybody here, I'm sure knows, as costumers, we don't say hello. We run up and say, "Oh my God, how did you make that?" So there was a lot of that. It was a wonderful green room, and just being able to ogle everybody up close was really fun, despite how all of us were extremely stressed. So here is a glimpse of New York Comic Con to give you a very small sense of the scale of this convention. It is massive. It is huge, huge, huge. It's possibly the biggest convention I've ever been to. Like, we have Fan Expo Toronto, which is pretty big, but New York Comic Con is like 3 times the size. It was insane. So that was a little bit overwhelming to begin with. And here's a glimpse of C2E2. I don't offhand know how they compare size-wise, but they're both huge. And like at C2E2, it took me about half an hour to walk from my hotel to where the judging was going to be. Like, and that was all mostly just through the convention. So it was a lot. Like, on the Saturday morning, I had gotten dressed in my costume to do a photo shoot. And after having to make that walk to the convention, when I got back to the hotel, I said, I'm not doing that again in costume. So I took my costume in a suitcase to the green room, and then just got dressed in the green room when it was time for judging, because it was just too much to handle. So when you're entering these competitions, some of them require you to submit a build book when you're applying for the competition. Some of them don't. For the crown competition, for when I entered at New York Comic Con, they didn't require a full build book. They required some progress photos and information in a form that they provide. But other conventions, you have to send in like a pitch portfolio explaining who you are. So what are your previous costumes? What percentage of your costume is finished here? They want to see photos of the progress, because they want to see like what quality your work is and what likelihood are you going to be actually done in time. These are some of the photos that I submitted. This is actually a portfolio that I printed out to show the judges later. but these are some of the photos that I submitted with my application, just to give a sense of what my costume looks like and what work has gone into it. So here is the judging. It was about 5 minutes per contestant. After you were accepted, shortly before the convention, they sent an email informing me of, what time is my judging slot. Actually, first they asked me, like, are there particular days that I prefer? Are there times that I'm not available? And then I was given my judging slot. And so you show up in costume for your judging, but you can take your costume off after the judging because it can be a couple of hours or even a full day before the competition, because some people got judged on the Friday. I chose to get judged on the Saturday just so I didn't have to get dressed twice. As mentioned, because it is a mostly craftsmanship oriented competition, most of the judging decisions are finished before the show even starts. The show can factor into their decisions slightly, but only sort of like if something falls off on stage, then that might color the judges' decisions. But most of their decision is going to be made before the show even starts. And it was basically the same judging experience in the New York Comic Con and at C2E2.
A lot of these motifs on the cape and on the skirt, I appliqued the satin on top of the velvet. So I planned it out on paper, I cut out the appliques, pinned them down and basted them down, and then I did the embroidery on top of that to secure the appliques down.
Okay, so the Crown has the regional competitions have in addition to having first, second, and third, and then the first place winner goes on to the next level of competition. In addition to that, they also have some category awards. The category awards are needlework, armor, and FX. And which category you enter, like obviously a lot of costumes have combinations of elements, so it's up to the contestants' discretion which category they choose to enter. But there could be discussions with the judges of, like, we think that this person is eligible or is the most strong in this category, so we're going to get an award anyways. That may happen, I'm not sure. But the costumes, this is from the rules on their website. Costumes are judged on accuracy or design and ambition and construction. And there are 3 overall winners in addition to the category winners. The category winners get little medallions, like in a little display case. And the overall first, second, and third will get cash prizes. So here's my walk at New York Comic Con.
Novel Snow Glass Apples by Neil Gaiman. That's right. They're from Toronto, Canada, and loves the challenge of bringing a 2D design to life. She is drawn to extreme amounts of detail, but this design turned out to be even more work than she originally thought. A recreation of Colleen Doran's cover art for Neil Gaiman's dark retelling of Snow White titled Snow Glass Apples. This costume took over 2 years to finish. It is completely hand embroidered. That's right. Using gold working, beading, and tambauer embroidery. Even the cape lining is embroidered and beaded, resulting in the cape alone weighing almost 6 pounds. So please, New York Comic Con, bow for your queen.
So that was my presentation.
Novel.
Oh, there we go. Okay, so here are a couple photos that I took with fellow competitors at C2E2. As I mentioned, it was super fun to get up close to everybody and chat and see all their stuff up close. We were all, as I mentioned, extremely stressed, like vibrating with stress backstage, but it was still really fun. On the left, that is the third place winner for the global competition, Jinxie Cosplay. Her I have a couple of pictures of her coming up. Her stuff was just unbelievable. It was perfect in every way. And on the left, sorry, on the right, we have Lunar Lynn, who was the fourth regional winner. She won the C2E2 regional qualifier. So I was competing against her for the national title. And she spent, I think, at least a couple years on this costume to get it completely flawless in every way. And it's just amazing. That's one of the things about this level of competition. I've judged this level of competition before, and everybody is so perfect that it is almost impossible to judge because you're having to nitpick the tiniest of things and consider like how many things did somebody do perfectly. It's when I judged Euro Cosplay in I think it was 2019, that was in the UK. It was, you know, people who had won from their respective countries all coming together, and it physically pained me having to only give like a first, second, and third because we had like 20 costumes that were all perfect. And I come from, you know, a lot of ICG type conventions, and so I'm used to being able to give out as many awards as I feel are merited. So that, yeah, that was really tough. So I do not envy the judges at either New York Comic Con or C2E2 because that green room was just unbelievable. Like every single costume was amazing, and they were all different. So here's Jinxie's some details of Jinxie's costume. Like those feathers are 3D printed, and they all had like the detail on them was so fine. They had the little feather texture that was 3D printed in them. It was really, really cool. This was the second place winner, Hermione Cosplay. Her embroidery was flawless, and also you can't see it here, but she also I was hearing from the judges and on her Instagram afterwards, she also had done all of the undergarments, all like handmade and embroidered and decorated thematically to fit with the costume. So it wasn't just the outer garments, it was the undergarments as well. And this was the first place winner, Matthew Barry. This is from Monster Hunter. The weathering job, this is all leather. So his leather working skills are unbelievable. The weathering makes it look like 100% realistic. And he even figured out a way to electroplate the Warbler weapons. So Warbler is a thermoplastic. So when you heat it, it gets soft. And electroplating involves heating things up. But he managed to, like, over a very slow incremental process, electroplate his weapons. And like it's hard to see in the photos, but in person, it looked like real metal. It was just jaw-dropping. Here are some of the other contestants. On the left, Kirli was the representative from Australia in the global competition. And here are other couples that I really loved their costumes. They were so cool. And as you can see, there's a huge variety of styles and techniques and materials. And so it was just a wonder to look around that green room. Okay, so I guess I'm flowing through my slides here. Hopefully I have a lot of questions. Would I do it again? I don't know, maybe. I'm still thinking about this because, so my thoughts about this competition, as I mentioned, I come from, I came up through competitions that were run by ICG costumers, and so I'm used to, say, Anime North or Otaku-thon or Costume Con. We don't have big cash prizes. We have like a certificate and a horse ribbon, and occasionally a little statuette. So I'm used to just competing for the fun of it. I make something that I love that I really want to make, and then I'll put it on stage and have fun. I can hang out with people in the green room. It'll be a good time. So I'm used to competing on that kind of level. So the whole process and mindset of competing and for real money, big money, because like the first place at New York Comic Con was $1,000. The first place for the global winner at C2E2 was $5,000. So that kind of stakes changes the way that you are feeling. It changes the way that you're thinking about competition. And it kind of got in my head. Like, it kind of messed with my head a bit, where I've never been that stressed about masquerade before in my life. Like, I was so stressed. And if I were to do it again, I think I would have to come into it with a better headspace, where I'm thinking, because okay, I've been judging and competing for many years now, and I know how it's always a crapshoot. You can't control anything except what you bring to the table. You have no control over whether somebody else brings something better. You know, what happens, it happens. So I intellectually know that, but internalizing that and going into a competition trying to win is not usually how I do things. And so if I were to enter this kind of competition again, I would have to go in with a sort of a healthier mindset, where I'm, you know, like, I am just here to have fun and not be so focused on trying to win. Because, like, I think part of it was that, you know, I've put so much money and effort into this costume. It cost a lot of money to get to New York. You know, like, I'm really trying to win. And and when I did win at New York, then I started thinking, oh no, do I actually have a chance in Chicago? And so then I started getting even more stressed, because I felt like going into New York, I had no idea what my prospects were. I had no idea if I had a chance. When I won in New York, then I started to like really feel that I might have a chance, and that kind of got into my head even more. So I am thinking about competing on this kind of level in the future, but I'm going to have to sort of examine my thought processes as I approach it, and not let myself get too focused on the competition aspect of it, and go back to what I really enjoy, which is the making, the wearing, and the camaraderie of everybody else there. Because, like, the chances that any one person is going to win are fairly, you know, they're not great. So it's really all about the other people that you're there with. And where's my notes? I had notes, and I managed to completely ignore them. So what do I have on my notes? So okay. So how do I feel about the championship model of competition? As mentioned earlier, because the competitions that I'm used to are, like, say, costume con type masquerades, I'm used to having, say, control over how I present my costume on stage. I'm used to having, say, music that I can submit. And, like, I tend to not do very elaborate presentations, but I do like to at least have, like, a dramatic walk on with my own music, etc. And this model of competition, because they're live streaming, a lot of these competitions do not allow you to submit your own music. Like in this case, because as you saw how the presentation was just an MC introducing you and you do a little walk. Some of them are like that. Some of them do have music, but they provide their own, you know, royalty-free music, license-free music. Some, like World Cosplay Summit, you do provide your own audio, but it has to be royalty, like license-free audio, or it has to be completely made by you, because they don't want to have to deal with any licensing issues in the live stream. So those are, you know, some things you have to keep in mind with this kind of competition. So when I was thinking about how I wanted to put this costume on stage, I had wanted to do some kind of simple dramatic presentation, because I had an idea for what I wanted to do, but I was not accepted to the one competition that I did apply that does have a sort of more stage element. And so I decided, well, I'll do the crown instead. I would have liked to do something spooky with my glowing heart, because there is a story behind it, but you know, it's fine. So I don't love the just walk across and wave model, but it's not too bad. In some previous years, I don't recall if it's this particular competition or a different one, there are some competitions of this model where the MC goes up to the costumer and starts asking them questions, and that that is like hell for me. I cannot imagine trying to be clever and witty on the spot. So that's definitely not the kind of competition for me. But if I just have to sort of swan around and try not to look like deer in the headlights, I'm cool with that. So this model of competition seems to be more and more popular lately. I don't know if you guys maybe have noticed, but there are quite a few of these championship circuits that are going around. There's like at least 4 or 5 that I can think of off the top of my head. And I think they're good for what they are, which is, you know, people who want to compete at the highest level of costuming. But I have seen that, I think, for example, in the UK or some places like the UK, from what I hear from friends, there's more focus on that sort of really high level competitions, and there aren't as many beginner level competitions in some regions, and so the beginners don't have anywhere to start. So I think that while, you know, while these championship model competitions are fine for the people at the top, we definitely still need to have the more introductory level, you know, anybody can enter level of competitions so that people can, you know, like cut their teeth on competition and not feel so intimidated. Because like, yeah, this level of competition is deeply intimidating because everybody is perfect and you have to be perfect to even have a chance. And you know, as with any competition that is posted on the internet, there were some peanut gallery comments, especially after New York Comic Con, where, you know, anytime something needlework wins against something that looks like a big robot or whatever, there's always going to be somebody complaining that, oh, they're, you know, they're shenanigans, the judges were biased, blah, 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 blah. But that, we see that after pretty much every single competition that is posted online. So I didn't really take that to heart. The only thing that bothered me the most was, if I go back one slide, so the girl on the right there with her Thor, that costume was flawless. She did leatherworking, metalworking. It was amazing. It looked exactly out of the movie, but you couldn't see all that detail from the stage. So she was criticized heavily, and it was deeply unfair. And I'm very unhappy about how she was treated because her costume was fantastic. But, you know, the peanut gallery on the internet always have opinions. Okay, so I guess we'll open it up to questions now. So I will stop sharing. There we go.
One question is, do you plan out the techniques you're going to use ahead of time, or do you make those decisions more organically once you get started with the actual piece?
A little bit of both. In most cases, I will have sort of a rough idea of what techniques I want to use. But I am very bad about doing tests beforehand because I get impatient and I just want to get to the real thing. So I tend to just start, and then sometimes I have to rip things out if I don't like the way it looks. But for the Snow Queen, because there was so much embellishment, and it was so heavy, like so dense, I basically was just making it up as I went. Like I had some ideas, like there were some specific areas where I'm like, okay, I want to use this technique in this one little tiny place. But then the rest of it, I was just kind of going with the flow and trying things out. It was a lot of experimentation.
Maral, tell us about the judges. What was their qualifications? Had any of them entered the competition before and gotten anywhere?
Yes. So at C2E2, one of the judges was the winner from last year, from 2023. And one of them was actually one of the judges, both at C2E2 and at New York Comic Con, is a very experienced costumer from India. His online handle is Samir Tikka Masala. He does fantastic work. I've been following him for quite a while. So he's done a lot of judging at a lot of competitions in the past. So yeah, like all of the judges that they had were very qualified. One of them at New York Comic Con, he's not a costumer per se, but he's an actor who is who's very interested in historical sewing techniques. So he has a lot of training and experience in that. And so I have like they do a very good job at picking qualified people for the judging.
So would you ever consider judging for this
Absolutely,
competition?
yeah. Actually, so funny you should say that. My prize for winning at the national level at C2E2 was that I got flown to London just a couple weeks ago for MCM London Comic Con, and I was a judge for 3 different competitions that weekend. I judged their regular masquerade, their variety show, and the World Cosplay Summit UK qualifiers. So it was a very busy weekend. I barely saw anything at the convention. I was judging the whole weekend.
I'd be interested to find out, you're talking about how the UK tends to go for very high level competition and not so much beginner competition. Does that mean they have a lot of people coming in from outside the UK just because they don't have that groundswell of other costumers?
From what I understand, it's not so much that all the competitions in the UK are high level, it's that they don't have the divisional system for a lot of their competitions. So there's no protections in place for the novices. So basically, only the high level people are really going to win anything at the UK competitions. This is only what I'm hearing from some of my friends. It may be regional, so like some areas may be different.
Have people who entered the competitions competed under ICG guidelines type of rules with the divisional system?
Where?
In this C2E2 competitions?
Yes, some of them have, yes. But because like masquerade or competition systems are so different in every area, like so in some regions, even just in the US and Canada, some of them will use a more ICG type divisional system. Others will have a simpler sort of like expert versus beginner division. So because everybody's coming from all different places, they all have very different competitive experiences, which is always also interesting to talk about, comparing like how everybody has come up. Like speaking of the UK, when I was judging at MCM just the other week, we gave technically we were only supposed to give like a first, second, and third for their masquerade, but because I am who I am and because of my background, I was like, I needed to give out a few more awards. So I insisted that we give out a few honorable mentions. And one of the honorable mentions we gave was to this guy who did a really, really cool original design Loki from Marvel. And he didn't show up for the award ceremony after the masquerade. And I was told backstage that he had been competing for a long time and he'd never won anything. And so he usually just leaves after the competition because he figures he's never going to win anything. I ran into him outside the convention and I mentioned like, hey, do you know that you won something? And he had no idea. He had been competing for 12 years. He had never won anything and he was in tears. So like, that's what I'm talking about, where like, they don't have any sort of division to protect the beginners, because like, if that guy were entering at a competition here, in the novice division, he absolutely would have won something like long ago. So that's my personal opinion about, yes, we should have the divisional system.
How do they advertise these competitions? How do people hear about them?
I think it's mostly word of mouth. The conventions that hold them are very, very big. They're corporate events. So they have a lot of advertising money, they have a lot of marketing. And they're written about in local newspapers and even some national newspapers. They are live streamed, and so they get a lot of traction online. But also like in the cosplay community, everybody sort of hears about the big flashy costumes that win big prizes. And so you sort of start seeing them around, and then so like, I had been hearing about the crown for several years before I really started considering it, because as I mentioned, I had thought that only something that like used that had, you know, giant armor and lights up and has, you know, all the bells and whistles even had a fighting chance. And so it wasn't until just a year or so ago that I considered entering.
Linda has a question. You mentioned you got to submit some documentation when you entered, but that at that point the costume is likely not 100% done. Did they allow you to submit a completed documentation for your final judging?
Yes, so when I went to my judging, my workmanship judging appointment, I brought my final bill book with me that had, you know, my full documentation there. Now, you know, we leave the papers with them. They may or may not have a lot of time to read it, but you do bring it with you for the judging appointment.
Do you include reference images for the costume you were trying to reproduce?
Yes.
Okay. Are all the costumes reproductions of some kind or another, or are some of them original designs?
Some of them were original designs, like the one when I had the screen of some of the other contestants, the one in the middle, the Umberly, that was like an interpretation of a goddess from Dungeons and Dragons, and that was an original design. It basically, from what I understand, it needs to be related to like fandom in some way. But it can't be an original design of an existing character. It just needs to be, you know, some kind of relation to like comics or video games or movies or something like that. One of the things I forgot to mention in the presentation was that this costume kind of blew up my social media slightly. Before I made this costume, I didn't have a really big following. But about halfway through, when I posted a video of the first time I put the skirt on, just as a test wearing. I posted a little video on my Instagram. It went slightly viral. I like more than doubled my Instagram followers within like a month. And all of a sudden I was getting comments from like people that I didn't know. Because usually like I was used to only getting, you know, the people following me are my friends. And all of a sudden I was getting followed by tons and tons of strangers. It was very overwhelming and weird. But you know, suddenly there was a lot of interest in my costume. So after the New York Comic-Con competition, I started making some videos on my Instagram of these deep dives of different elements of the costume, just, you know, so people could get an up close view and explaining my thought process, etc. So, and if you want, you can go on I can send you some links if you want, or you could find them on my Instagram of some of those videos.
Are there any other questions? Thanks so much for giving this presentation. It's been really amazing to see your costume is just, as most of your costumes, blow my mind. So congratulations on your win, and we hope you do it again.
Thank you. I have plans. They're even more ridiculous than the last one, you know. Every time I say I'm never going to do anything like this again, and then 2 years later.
Join us for our next webinar, Working with Foul Fur with Darren Boast. Costumer and professional mascot Darren Boast will provide an introduction to the foul fur, the many types that are available, sources, and how to select ones that are right for your costume. He will also discuss working with foul fur, including cutting and sewing techniques. The webinar happens on February 9th, 2025 from 1 to 2:30 p.m. Pacific Time, 4 to 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Announcements of upcoming webinars are emailed to Silicon Web and ICG members. They're posted as events and notices on Facebook and also published in Silicon Web's The Virtual Costumer magazine. They also appear on the calendar page of the Silicon Web Costumers Guild website. Recordings of past webinars are available on the webinars page. And for information about joining Silicon Web Costumers Guild, it's available on the Join Us page. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time.